Greetings and salutations. East Spencer Kyte, Wednesday, November 16th, which means it's time for one question for every fight here on the Severe MMA YouTube page. This week, of course, UFC Vegas 65, the Hangover Card coming out of UFC 281 at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Just an absolutely phenomenal night of fights last weekend in NYC. This weekend, not so much. Look, I'm going to... you've come to expect honesty and truth here, even from the guy that can get amped and get excited for just about anything. There's still some stuff that I'm interested and amped about for this card, but like, if you're expecting this to be anything like last Saturday, please lower your expectations. If you're expecting this to be anything like the card that follows it in Orlando, Florida in 2 weeks' time, please reduce your expectations. This is a classic hangover card headlined by a heavyweight matchup between Derrick Lewis and Serghei Spivac, which we will get to shortly. There are some good fighters and some good fights on this card. A few prospects that I'm very much interested in seeing, which we will cover as we go through this. But this is a textbook UFC APEX card. And I know that a lot of people are down on these events. They would like to do away with these events and get the UFC back on the road all the time, believing that would force them to improve the overall quality of these fight night events. As someone who has been to several Canadian fight night events, I can tell you that isn't really the case. And I think people need to go back and look at what some of the on the road fight night events were before the pandemic struck and start figuring out if this really is an Apex problem or the UFC just changing things up in terms of how they're putting things out there. I also think, as we always talk about, it has so much more to do than just than just one individual factor. Harry, this might have to be a speaker's corner at some point. But still, this is, as I said, a card with some reasonable fights, some interesting fights, some good prospects to watch, and heavyweight matchup off the top. So let's get into it. Derrick Lewis versus Serghei Spivac. My question is, what does Lewis have left to offer here? He enters on a 2-fight slide, having lost to Tai Tuivasa and Sergey Pavlovich earlier this year. He has lost 3 of his last 4. All of his losses in recent memory have been against good competition. Derrick Lewis isn't a guy that's going out there and getting beat by bums. He's beating very good competition, right? It's only a year and a half ago that he knocked out Curtis Blaydes. Beautiful uppercut. Blaydes goes in for a naked takedown attempt and just eats a ham hock and falls asleep. But we haven't seen that from Derrick Lewis in his last couple appearances. He's looked, I don't want to say more lethargic and more disinterested, but that fire hasn't necessarily been there. And look, Derrick has never been a guy that comes out and is bouncing all over the cage and super movement and all of that stuff. But he seemed more interested in engaging in previous matchups to this one. And previous matchups to his last couple. And so I'm really curious to know and curious to find out on Saturday whether this is Derrick Lewis at the almost tail end of this, almost at the end of this run, the end of his career, maybe even, or if these last couple fights were just him being in there against better competition and not quite getting up for it the way that maybe he has in the past. And both of those things can be true at the same time. At his best, in his heyday of this run that he's been on and sort of this several year incarnation of Derrick Lewis, he beats the Serghei Spivacs of the world, right? This is the level of guy he beats. He loses a couple of fights to these upper tier, look like contender guys, as he did with Tai, as he did with Pavlovich. And then he rebounds against the Spivacs, the Chris Daukases, the Augusto Sakai types, those sorts of athletes. And so this is one of those ones where I think the result is instructive. Because if Derrick Lewis can't defeat or doesn't defeat Serghei Spivac here. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be because Spivac is orders of magnitude better than Derrick Lewis. I think it will be because Lewis is just at a point of not being all that engaged and throwing less than he has in the past and kind of just out here to cash them checks, which, look, get that bank. I'm all for you getting money. I'm all for any athlete getting whatever they can from the UFC. But this is a dangerous sport to be just going out here for a paycheck for. And so I'm really curious to see over these next few days, as he does media, as he's getting ready for this fight, as we see him on the scale on Friday, and then as we see him in the Octagon on Saturday night, to get a sense of whether this is the end of the road for Derrick Lewis, or these last couple of fights were just kind of a little bit of a hiccup and sort of the fitting with the pattern of his career. Light heavyweights in the co-main event, Iwan Cutelaba and Kennedy Nzechukwu. My question is, will Kennedy Nzechukwu follow Big Brother's lead? So Ryan Spann went out on Saturday at UFC 281 and turned in the best performance of his career. Harry and I talked about it on the takeaways. Harry had a little bit different of a read and looked at it more from the sadness of Dominic Reyes side, which surely I acknowledge. But I also acknowledge that Ryan Spann had moments in that fight that he didn't have in previous outings, right? He showed greater poise to me. He showed greater composure to me in those moments and sort of really understood the assignment, went out, fought to the best of his abilities, put his abundant skills on display quickly, early, dominantly, and got a great win. And Nzechukwu is one of those guys that you see the fight with Carlos Ulberg. You see some of the fights earlier in his career, even the debut loss to Paul Craig. Right now, it's not Paul Craig to where he is now, but for a large portion of that fight, Kennedy Nzechukwu dominated that fight, and then he got caught, as many people have, against Paul Craig. He's been sort of inconsistent 500 fighter throughout his UFC career, and that's fine for somebody that is as young and as raw, or was as young and as raw as he was when he got into the UFC. But he's been here a little bit now. And if he's going to take a step forward and sort of start living into that potential and reaching some of that upside that he shows, because you don't beat Carlos Ulberg if you don't have some upside and some clear skill and power, then I don't think he's ever going to get there. And this feels like one of those fights where we're going to find out, because one of the problems, I think, or one of the challenges for Nzechukwu to this point in his career is that he's been a bit of a slow starter, right? Guys have been able to come out and get on top of him, and then he can't always claw his way back the way he did against Ulberg. And Iwan Cutelaba is like the nth degree of the come out and start fast on you guys. He is the alpha and omega of that class of people. He is going to be standing in Kennedy's face when he's being introduced, probably by Joe Martinez this weekend, let's be honest, and shouts to Joe Martinez. And so this is one where Nzechukwu needs to come out and be aggressive early and fight to the full of his potential. He has Ryan's lead last weekend. He has that example, right? He has that to look at and go, okay, here we go. He also has several other teammates fighting on this card, and I wonder how that will feed into it as well. Will we see a little Fortis momentum? Will we see a little wave of success? Will we see one or two of the guys previous suffer setbacks, and that prompts him to go out and sort of lift the levels for everybody at the end of the night? I've always thought that Kennedy Nzechukwu is one of those guys that could go forward. His last performance was his best performance to date. I remember Harry and I did the takeaways afterwards, and both said, like, once he figured out to start smashing those elbows, that fight really shifted and he got the finish, and it was dominant and impressive. And if he can carry that over and build on what he saw Ryan Spann do last weekend, this could be a very good win for Kennedy Nzechukwu on Saturday. Next fight up, heavyweights, Chase Sherman and Waldo Cortes-Acosta. My question is, are we really doing this again? Really? This? Like it's now getting to the point of parody where the athletes and the positioning really do fit what I talked about a couple weeks ago when Chase Sherman was supposed to fight Josh Parisian in a bout that got canceled the day of the fight, as Josh Parisian had to go into the hospital. Josh, hope everything is going well. Hope you are recovering and we see you back soon. But like, really, we're here again. We're going to do another heavyweight on the main card when there's more interesting fights further down the way. Like, oh. Now, the one thing I can hope, or the one thing that people should hope, is that Chase Sherman is probably a lot more hittable than even Jared Vanderaa was last time out for Waldo Cortes-Acosta. And so maybe the former Dominican baseball player lands one of those fastballs and we get out of here in 60 seconds, 2 minutes. I don't want to see 15 minutes of these dudes parading around the octagon, not quite throwing enough, not quite doing enough. It'd be fine if it was earlier in the day. If it was earlier in the card, you kick off this event with this. Cool. Great. Fine. Got lots of good things after it. This just feels, as always, like a potential momentum killer. And I just don't understand it. And like, it's hilarious that it's two more of the 10 individuals. It's 2 of the 10 individuals that have been in this position already this year. And I understand getting Chase Sherman a fight after his fight gets canceled. He went through a camp. He wants to compete. Fine, cool. All of that. I also understand getting Waldo Cortes-Acosta back out there after a win, coming off tough. Want to see if we can build a little something. Cool. All of that makes sense. Put it on the prelims. Just put it on the prelims. Because if this goes south, as Cortes-Acosta's fight with Jared Vanderaa did, it just drags the life out of this card, which could, looking at the fights that are before it, immediately before it, could be moving along at a good clip and feel real exciting. And then we get this, which, yes, upside is rapid finish, fireworks. Holy hell, did you see that knockout? And most of the time, I will be here being your optimist, being your glass half full, find a silver lining dude. Not with main card heavyweights like this. With main card heavyweights like this, I expect a slog. I expect a slow down in the middle of the main card where I just feel like, oh, now we got to get rolling again into these final 2 fights. Said it last time, saying it again. We got to change this in 2023 UFC. Even open the main card with them. Just not the middle of the main card. I just don't get it. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this is entertaining. I hope this is fun. I hope this exceeds all of my very low expectations. But until one of these fights really, truly does, I will be here every time they're booked asking a version of this same question. Next up, one of those fights I was talking about just a second ago that could feel good. Welterweights, Andre Fialho and Muslim Salikhov. My question, and believe me, I'm saying this a little tongue-in-cheek. Remember when everyone thought Fialho was a top 10 guy? Like, it wasn't that long ago. It was just this year, because it's still his first year in the UFC. This is fight number 5. But he had that run, right? He debuted against Michel Pereira on short notice and looked good. Held his own, won the opening round, and then just couldn't really put things together through the second and third, but was in there and fought well. Goes out and wins his next 2 fights, sparking dudes real quick, back to back, wants to jump in again, gets a 4th fight at UFC 275 in Singapore against Jake Matthews and gets clobbered. And we haven't seen him since. And so we've had that reset, slow down. This is the way it's supposed to go. And it feels to me, and the reason I ask the question the way I do, and being a bit of a dick about it, is because Fialho is a reminder to everyone that putting so much stock in beating the Cameron Van Camps of the world is just a colossal mistake. Look, beating out Miguel Baeza before that is a good win. I like Miguel Baeza. He's been a good fighter, but he hasn't been a top 15 guy. He hasn't been a top 20 guy. And so, you know, how do you rate Fialho as somebody that should be even higher than that? And so we've seen the opportunities, we've seen him sort of push and everybody get behind him. Now we've had this reset, and I think this is a chance to sort of get it's going to sound weird, but this feels like a chance to reset and recalibrate our expectations for Fialho heading into his sophomore year. Year one can just end up being, okay, let's see. He's either going to be one fight to the good or one fight under 500. So he's either going to be 3-2 or 2-3 going into next year, because he's not rushing back and fighting on one of these cards that's already booked up for December. And there's only 3 of them. So, you know, there's no absolute end of the year card that he can turn around and be on. And so it just feels like we're going to get a sense here of, is this a guy that can be in that second 15 and push towards the top 15? Or is this a guy that's going to be in that second 15, but just kind of stay there, which, as always, is perfectly okay. There have been lots of fun, entertaining, competitive fighters that have just lived in that space. And he may be one of them. It's, you know, could he be a Portuguese power hitting Alex Morono? Nothing wrong with that. Certainly look forward to seeing him compete. And don't take any of this as me not being interested in seeing this fight. I think this is a fascinating fight. Salikhov is 38 years old. He's still ultra competitive. He lost last time out. Fine. Before that, he had won a whole bunch of fights coming out of his debut loss to Alex Garcia. Like, this is a good fight. This is a good competitive fight. It's going to tell us a little bit about each of these guys and where they stand. And so I'm certainly interested in it. And Salikhov lost to the Leech. Like, it's not like he lost to anybody that's a bum. He lost to a very good fighter in Li Jingliang. And so we're going to get a sense here of where these guys stand and what they can do going into next year. But I just hope that people can look at Fialho and use his rush of success and then the pullback following the Jake Matthews loss as a sort of benchmark and a reminder that we can't rush our expectations and rush our projections of these people before we see them in there with a certain caliber of fighter, right? Harry and I talk about it all the time on the takeaways. We talk about it all the time on the preview show, and I like to think I mention it a lot here. The reason we speak so frequently about athletes needing to be tested and needing to see those progressive and incremental steps up in competition is exactly this reason. You need to know where the ceiling sits at each step and where the floor sits at each step. So we've got an understanding now of where each of those are for Andre Fialho coming into this. Better than X, not as good yet as Y. And now we just go forward and see, because every fight is a chance to make adjustments and grow and develop and get better. And so the Jake Matthews loss is a reset. We come back, we see where we're at beyond that. The problem is that so many people want to just take a big win and an impressive highlight reel performance and rush fighters into the top 10, rush fighters into the top 15, and pick them ahead of people that are established and that have track records, and put them well in advance of people that are on winning streaks and things like that, right? We saw it a little bit. There was a little bit of that, like Dan Hooker shouldn't have been less than minus 200 last weekend. Thank you for the free money, but he shouldn't have been less than minus 200 last weekend against Claudio Poyes, who is a good prospect, who was my fighter to watch. And I still want to see him progress and improve and develop. But like, Dan Hooker is a level above that dude. And so I think we just need to have these reminders, like the Fialho Jake Matthews fight, and then come into this one where we can have a little bit of a like, okay, what's the conversation for Fialho going into next year? Where does he fit? What's the high end that is reasonable to expect? Who are the kind of guys we want to see him against next, and progress this naturally, as opposed to getting ourselves all worked up, all into a frenzy because they knock out some dude that is no longer in the UFC, Cameron Van Camp, and then can't hack it against the guy that isn't even in the top 15 in Jake Matthews. Thank you for coming to this TED Talk. Next up, another welterweight fight, Jack Della Maddalena and Danny Roberts. My question is Della the 2022 UFC Rookie of the Year? He's 2-0, 2 first-round finishes. And look, if you want to put the one against Pete Rodriguez in his debut aside a little bit or like diminish it a little bit, cool, I got you. I'm with you. Short notice, Pete Rodriguez had 4 fights at the time, very limited in terms of his overall ability. Still, Della goes out and handles business real clean. But I mean, going out and beating Ramazan Emeev in the first round is one of those wins where it's like, okay, all right. And if he goes out and posts a third victory here, especially if it's a third first round stoppage win over Danny Roberts, he's on the ballot and he's probably on the podium. There's some other people in this mix, right? Muhammad Mokaev has looked very good. Jael Ten Almeida has looked very good. Kyle Bahayo has 3 wins. Michael Morales has a pair of victories. He's looked good. There are a few fighters in this range. But if you give me Della winning 3 fights and one of them against a very established, very dangerous veteran in Emeev, and then following that up with Danny Roberts, he's in that mix. He's in that conversation. I think right now, just me thinking it through, looking at it, I think the Emeev win is sort of the best of the bunch for those different fighters that I mentioned. And so if he can make it 3, I think he can win. Like, this is a year where we haven't had that great big splashy newcomer, right? Last year, 2021, we had a bunch of big names that we already had history with, that we already knew sort of the level of anticipation and excitement about, right? Michael Chandler showed up in the UFC. Paddy Pimblett showed up in the UFC, and they had good years and they were towards the top of this conversation. This year isn't like that. We haven't had any big splashy free agent signings or any big splashy debuts. It's been Contender Series grads. It's been people that have matriculated towards the UFC rather than coming in as champions from outside promotions and just built-in fan bases rising the level of that recognition, I guess. And so I just want to see if Della can go 3-0. He's one of the few people coming off of last season that I was very certain was going to be successful in the UFC and make a smooth transition. I didn't necessarily think it was going to be this quickly or this smooth, but like a win here over Danny Roberts puts him firmly in that second 15 to me. And so to get into that pack after year 1 is pretty solid, and it's beating some better competition, right? Like, just talked about Fialho. These are better wins. Ramazan Emeev and Danny Roberts would be better wins than Fialho has put together, and people got real excited about Fialho. And so let's just see what happens here. This is going to be interesting, especially having them back to back, right? They have a chance to sort of first year guys back to back, same division. Let's see. I think Della's my clubhouse leader right now in the Rookie of the Year race. I haven't really gotten, I'll get into that next week when we have an off week and we start looking forward to year-end awards. But I think he's towards the top of my list. And so if he gets a win on Saturday, he might cement his place on the podium and maybe even be the clubhouse leader at number 1. Move to the flyweights, Charles Johnson versus Zhalgas Zhumagulov. My question is, how does Johnson look in his sophomore showing? So, former LFA flyweight champion makes his debut in London against Muhammad Mokaev, fights him to a decision, suffers a loss, fine. We know the level of Mokaev. We've seen him now come back subsequently and pick up a 3rd win this year. Again, he's in that conversation. And so this is a chance for Johnson to come back against a veteran guy, a talented guy, a dangerous guy, but someone that has struggled to have success at the UFC level, right? Zhumagulov is 1-4 in the UFC. He's only lost to good competition. Julian Paiva, Manel Cape. Can't remember going to pull it up here just so I make sure I get all of them. The win was over Jerome Rivera. The other two losses are Amir Albazi and Jeff Molina. And like, only one of them finished him. Only Cape was able to finish him. The other three are decisions. So you know the level of quality it takes to beat Zhumagulov at this point. And I just want to see, for a guy like Charles Johnson, who's a little bit older, but had good success in LFA, defended the title with a fifth round knockout win or stoppage win over Carlos Mota, who we saw a couple weeks ago against Cody Durden. And so getting a road game against a big prospect like Makayev, who is a very good grappler and is able to sort of neutralize a bunch of what you want to do, is a tough first ask. And so this feels like the right sort of step back without being like, we're handing you a layup type of fight for Johnson. I think he has the ability to be one of those guys that just fits really well in this division. Not necessarily going to be a contender, not necessarily going to break into the top 15, but can kind of live on the outside there, sort of as Cody Durden has, right? Tough out, got some experience, never going to go away easy. Alternate wins and losses, maybe 2 wins, maybe 2 losses, whatever. But you got to get through Zhumagulov first. And I want to see if he can. Next up, women in the flyweight division, Jennifer Maia and Marina Moroz. My question is whether Maia is in that Dan Hooker position this week. So here's what I mean. I mentioned it a little earlier. Dan Hooker, less than a -200 favorite last weekend at Madison Square Garden, making his return to the lightweight division against Claudio Puelles. And there was a lot of talk about sort of the recent struggles of Dan Hooker, who came into the fight just 1-4 in his last 5 appearances. And it felt to me, outside looking in, that a lot of people looked at the 5-fight winning streak of Claudio Puelles and the back-to-back knee bar finishes for him over Gritzmacher and Clay Guida, and thought, hey, maybe Dan Hooker's in that slide and he's starting to fall off a little bit here. Hangman obviously comes out, lights him up, gets the stoppage win in the second round, looks great, reminds everybody that, hey, I'm Dan fucking Hooker. Don't go write me off yet. And it just feels to me, and actually feels even greater, that Maia's getting a little bit of the same treatment here. She is the underdog coming into this fight. And I understand that Jennifer Maia hasn't looked great in her last couple fights. And like in terms of results, it hasn't been great, right? She's lost 2 in a row, lost 3 of her last 4, 4 of her last 4 of her last 6. It hasn't been great in the UFC. She's sub 500 in the UFC. And Marina Moroz is coming in on a great victory over Maia Agapova and has been good over the last few fights, right? I think she's on a 4-fight winning streak. But like, this just feels like another one of those, we need to compare the level of competition and who these people were fighting before we go throwing all kinds of like, Marina Moroz is going to crush Jennifer Maia's out there. Because while wins over Sabina Mazo and Mayra Bueno Silva, and as I said, Agapova are good wins for Moroz to carry a 3-fight winning streak into this, are we really going to fault Jennifer Maia for losing to Manon Fiorot and Caitlin Chukagian and then losing her title fight to Valentina Shevchenko before that, where she was the first person in hell knows how long to win a round from Valentina Shevchenko, right? Like that was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, everybody was like, oh my God, Jennifer Maia won a round. And now she's the underdog against Marina Moroz. I get that the results haven't been there, but like, this is a harbinger of things to come on Friday's show. But like, if you want to give me plus money on a 32-year-old established talent who has only lost to the few fighters above her in the rankings against Marina Moroz, I think people may be counting out Jennifer Maia a little bit too quickly here, but we'll see on Saturday night. Next up, Vince Morales, Miles Johns, bantamweight fight. The question is, can Miles Johns bounce back and move forward? Johns is one of the aforementioned Fortis MMA guys that is on this card ahead of Kennedy and Nzechukwu. The other is Fernie Garcia, who we'll get to later. He's coming into this fight off a submission loss to John Castaneda in February, where he also tested positive for Adderall and had to serve a 6-month suspension. He's 28 years old. He's 12-2. He was the LFA champ for a while. He beat Adrian Yanez to win that title. Split decision, but still beat Adrian Yanez to win that title. Beat some good competition there prior, Levi Moles. And it's just, listen, this may be one of those spots where I have blinders for Fortis MMA guys because I have a great relationship with Saif Saud and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But like losing to Mario Batista, that sure has aged pretty well, right? Batista's looked great in his last couple of fights. Looks like a guy that can progress into the top 15. So I'm not faulting him for that loss as the first loss of his career. And then the fight with Castaneda, he started well and struggled in the second half of that fight, or the second round and into the third round of that fight before getting submitted. Fine. 28-year-olds struggle at times. They lose focus. They don't follow the game plan. They don't do everything right. They don't turn up on game night. It happens. I don't think I'm ready to count Miles Johns out completely because I trust the infrastructure of Fortis MMA. I trust what I've seen from him to this point, even if it hasn't been, right? Like even if the win over Cole Smith, which was out here a few years ago in Vancouver, split decision and you want to quibble about the decision, fine. The knockouts, the stoppage wins over Kevin Natividad and Anderson Dos Santos are legit good quality. You see the performance wins, and they're things that I will continue to give him the benefit of the doubt on as he goes forward. I don't expect prospects, emerging fighters to just be all forward. It can't just be all rise. There has to be a come down. And so is the Castaneda loss just that step back to reset to now go win 2 or 3 more in a row? I think if he's going to be somebody that is a factor in this division, if he is going to be somebody that works his way forward in this division to get up alongside a guy like Yanez, who he's already faced, or to get up even further than that, all the way into the top 15 or top 10 at some point, we need to see a performance. There needs to be an immediate bounce back and a quality effort on Saturday night. But I don't think it's reasonable to assume that that's not coming. This is a good assignment. Vince Morales is a tough dude who's on a couple losses himself. There are clearly established paths to victory against Vince Morales. And I want to see if Miles Johns can come out, find one, execute, have a good performance again to restart some of this momentum, to rebuild a little bit of buzz around his name. Because prior to that loss, I thought he was somebody that could really go forward in this division. And I'm interested to see if that happens starting again on Saturday. Next up, we stay at bantamweight. Kevin Natividad versus Ricky Turcios. My question is, what happened to the guy that won TUF 29? Look, I know a lot of people didn't watch The Return of the Ultimate Fighter featuring coaches Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega. I did. I recapped them for UFC.com. They were still like, wasn't just a money play. I enjoy The Ultimate Fighter. I don't care about the house stuff. The fights are still good. I like watching prospects. Sue me. Ricky Turcios looked good during the season. He was scrappy. He was feisty. He was competitive. He got into these wars, these back and forth, like need to win round 3 in order to advance. And every time he went out and won round 3 to advance and then to win the whole damn thing against Brady Hiestand. And then he went out and fought Eamon Zahabi a couple of months ago. And good Lord, was it awful. Like, just don't understand what he was doing. Stomping his feet all over the place, not engaging, punching 6 inches in front of Zahabi the whole night. It just didn't look good at all. And so now he takes a step back against a fighter that has lost each of his first 2 UFC appearances by stoppage. And like, this is one of those ones, man, where you got to come out and show something, because you looked to be somebody, not that was going to run up the rankings, because I think Ricky Turcios is a little bit older in terms of prospect wise. Like, he's in his late 20s, but like looked like somebody that could be a fun addition to the division, right? Just one of those guys that is going to be maybe even in that third 15, just in the middle of the pack in the division, but we can count on every time they're booked to get a fun, entertaining fight. He could be the way Chris Lytle was back in the day. He could be the way Joe Lozon was for a number of years. Nothing wrong. You looked forward to seeing those fuckers on a fight card. You saw the name and you were like, that'll be fun. No matter who it's against, no matter whether they've won their last fight, lost their last fight, always going to be entertaining. That's what I thought we were going to get from Ricky Turcios. And then it just wasn't that at all against Aiemann Zahabi. And I tell you what, Natividad is probably going to come out here looking to take your head off, because he's 0-2 in the UFC and got slept both times and doesn't want to be 0-3 and going back to the regional circuit. At the same time, Turcios doesn't want to start 0-2 after the Ultimate Fighter. Winning tough probably buys him a little bit more leeway. But like, if this is as bad as the last performance, there may not be room. You may not have a chance to get number 3 in and show what you got. So this is back where you fought your Ultimate Fighter fights. This is back where you won the whole thing. It's put up or shut up time for Ricky Turcios. I know he's not saying anything, but like it's put up time. It's show me time. And I just wonder if he can get back there. I just wonder if we can see that guy that looked very good on the Ultimate Fighter. Next up, strawweights, Vanessa Demopoulos, Maria Oliveira. My question is, can Demopoulos keep this going? I will be completely transparent and tell you that I have never been much of a fan of Vanessa Demopoulos. It's nothing personal at all. I just think she's very limited as a fighter. I think she's fairly one-dimensional in that she is a okay grappler who doesn't have a ton of striking, but is just an okay grappler. She, to me, is a perfect regional talent. The fact that she was LFA champion twice and fought good competition and fought reasonable competition and beat somebody like Sam Hughes and fought Lupi Godinez pretty close, that sort of just explains it all to me, right? She's 34 years old. There's ceilings here. But she's won her last 2 fights. And yeah, I mean, one of those, she got rocked earlier this year against Silvana Gomez Juarez and was able to catch an armbar. She went out last time and eked out a split decision against Jinhyu Frey. And so this is one of those fights that, like, it's not a horrible matchup. Maria Oliveira isn't somebody that I'm looking at as a go forward and be a super prospect that eventually lands a number next to their name. But I think I lean towards, as long as she can strike reasonably well, she should beat Vanessa Demopoulos. And so I want to see if the little monster can keep this going. Can she add on some stuff and keep building on this momentum? Because look, I say it all the time. You win consecutive fights. You win 3, 4, 5, 6 fights in the UFC. I don't give a shit who it's against. It's hard. It's difficult. And you will get my respect and you will get credit from me. So all credit to Vanessa Demopoulos for putting together this winning streak. I still just want to see if she can keep doing it. Like, it's clear to me that the UFC isn't like, oh, we've got ourselves something here. Because if they did feel that way, she wouldn't be fighting Maria Oliveira, who is just 1-2 in the UFC. She would be fighting somebody a little further up the pecking order. And so it feels like even the UFC wants to see if Demopoulos can keep this going. It's a chance for her to close out her year with 3 wins in 3 starts, which should get her, or probably will get her, in my opinion, a mention as an honorable mention in the like fighter of the year stuff, right? You get 3 wins in a calendar year. You at least deserve the little shout out. She's not in the top 10 or anything like that, because none of these wins are super valuable wins, but 3 wins is 3 wins. And so let's see if she can do it. Next up, Brady Hiestand versus Fernie Garcia. My question is, what's reasonable to expect of Hiestand at this point? So as I mentioned, he fought Ricky Turcios on the finale of The Ultimate Fighter Season 29, dropped a split decision, second loss of his career. Fine. Now he makes his post-tough promotional debut on Saturday against Fernie Garcia, the first of the 3 Fortis MMA fighters competing on Saturday. And I'm just kind of really curious to see what we get out of Hiestand. So he's 23 years old, turns 24 at the end of April. So still really young in his career. He's only got 7 fights. His 2 losses are Turcios and Chad and Helliger, who is in the UFC now. That happened out here close to me in Chilliwack. And like Chad had infinitely more fights than Brady Hiestand had at that point. He was on a 9, he was 9-5 and on a lengthy winning streak that eventually got him to Contender Series and then into the UFC where he won his debut, so on and so forth. I like Brady Hiestand. I liked what I saw from him on the show. Again, I watched the show, so I'm speaking from a place of experience and knowledge here. I watched the show. He's got some grit, and you can't teach it. He's got some heart, and you can't teach it, and I like that. He's also kind of hittable. He's also just still young and raw and figuring it out, putting it together, right? And so this to me is the first chance to get a second look at Hiestand, if you will. This is where we see what the year off since the fight with Turcios has built or has given birth to or given rise to, right? Because at a certain point, you can't just be the gritty guy that can win these dogfights. You've got to be able to, impose your will and play to your strengths and not just have to grind out and grit out everything by being the tougher, more durable, capable of digging deep guy. You can, from time to time, win fights that way, but it's not really a good recommendation for a career. And so another year older, another year of experience, another year working in a good gym at Sick Jitsu down the way in Spokane, Washington, working with Michael Chiesa, working with Juliana Pena when she's there, Rick Little, that crew. What can we expect? I think there was some, hey, this kid is a good prospect. I think he's a good prospect. Now, we've seen lots of good prospects not make it. We've seen lots of good prospects wash out of the UFC. It happens. It's supposed to happen. These are the best fighters in the world. Garcia is a good matchup. He is primarily a boxer. He's coming off a loss. He didn't look good in his debut. And so this is one of these guys gets a victory and starts moving forward and gets right. The other catches a second straight UFC setback, and we got to figure it out. I think there's something. I'm intrigued by Hiestand. I'm intrigued. I was during the season. I was in the finale with Turcios. I am now. I want to see where we get to. Last one, fight card opener. Natalia Silva versus Teresa Bleda. The question is, how will these 2 young talents look on Saturday? I'm really excited about this fight. Like genuinely looking forward to this. This should be on the main card instead of Chase Sherman and Waldo Cortes-Acosta. This is the one I would prefer to see on the main card because I think these 2 women have futures in the UFC, in the flyweight division. Silva looked great in her debut against Jasmine Jasudavicius. Picking her apart, looked great in striking. It was her first fight in almost 2 years, and she, no signs of rust, came out, looked terrific. Very good win, 25 years old. She's on a good overall streak in her last stretch, in her last 10 or 11 fights, where the only loss is to Marina Rodriguez. We know the level of that woman. And Bleda is somebody that I felt should have won a contract for her performance on the Contender Series. She is my fighter to watch this week. She is 20 years old. She is undefeated. She beat a current UFC fighter just a year ago in Lucia Pudilova, who came out and got a win before Bleda was on Contender Series. So again, we know the level there. And this is super interesting to me. These two are so intriguing to me. I think both of them have upside. I think both of them have potential. And I just want to see what this looks like. Like, as I said in my fighter to watch piece this week, this is one of those fights for Bleda, especially, where it's just set a baseline. Just familiarize yourself with her name and get a first read. Because I think this is 2 or 3 years down the road we're looking in terms of where she gets to and how she develops and things like that. But this is a fight that, like, if these two became top 15 fighters in the next 3 years, I wouldn't be surprised at all, given what we've seen of them to this point. Just if progressions in development follow the current arc they're on and go at what we've seen thus far, these two battling it out with numbers next to their name 3-4 years from now makes perfect sense to me. Silva looked that good. Bleda being 20 years old, she turns 21 at the end of the month, and already 6-0 as a pro, 7-0 as a pro, with that win over Pudilova in her back pocket, and wins over a couple other experienced veteran competitors in a weird mixed rule set exhibition fight, whatever it is. They're still good wins, right? They're the kind of thing that if you're not good, you lose those, regardless of what the rule set is. This is really intriguing to me. I'm so looking forward to this fight. Like, this is one of those ones. And look, the fight card starts at 10 a.m. out here on the west coast of Canada on Saturday. Cannot wait. Going to be great. Going to be a good time. Looking forward to this one to kick it off. Hopefully we don't get that lull right towards the end of the main card with that heavyweight bout. We don't get the lull. We don't get the lulls. We just get a good fight card. We get a nice hangover card. Hopefully this is one of those hangovers where it's not too bad. You have a greasy breakfast sandwich and a cup of coffee and a hot shower and you get right real quick. Hopefully this isn't I drank way too much and I can't function kind of hangover cards. But look, that's it for the show. That's it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with 10 things I like. And yes, there are 10 things I like about this card. I'm sure you can pick some of them out just from this one. I will be back on Friday with the severe picks in place. We made money last week. We cashed tickets last week at UFC 281. So I'm feeling good. I'm going to do my damnedest not to get too ahead of myself and try to like really build. Just going to, same idea, smart plays, good stacks, keep making money. I've got a couple really great episodes of A Conversation With lined up that will be running over these next few weeks. The show is going to run on Wednesdays from now on. Talked with Shawnee about it a little bit, and just we want to make sure that it gets the airtime that it deserves, because I greatly appreciate these athletes and commentators and actors and all the different people that join the program. Give me their time. I greatly appreciate it. And so I want to make sure that as we put it out, it's in a space where the most number of people are going to get exposure to it and get a chance to really take it in, because I think these are great conversations, fun conversations. Some of the people that I've got coming up are going to be really, really, really interesting conversations, I'm sure. So keep your eye out for that on Wednesdays as well. Check out the Patreon. Check out the preview show coming on Thursday. Myself, Io, and Harry. Check out everything, man. We're trying to do our best as we head towards the end of the year. We hope you're appreciating it. We're appreciating your feedback, your viewership, your support. Thank you kindly for it. Look after yourselves. Look after each other. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Know that we love you. Know that we appreciate you. And we'll see you next week on One Question.